The sky above New Mexico was smeared in shades of navy and black, speckled with stars that blinked like scattered Morse code. Inside a low, weather-beaten radio station on the outskirts of Albuquerque, Osler leaned back in his chair, tapping his boot against the side of the desk. The coffee in his chipped mug had gone cold hours ago, and the air was thick with dust and static. Rex, his loyal German shepherd, lay curled on the floor, his ears twitching at every crackle of the airwaves. The night had been quiet, until it wasn't. At 2:16 a.m., Osler's receiver sputtered to life with a high-pitched, undulating tone that made the hairs on his arms stand straight. It was rhythmic, but not mechanical. Intentional. Not the erratic buzz of weather interference or a stray broadcast, but something else, something alive. Rex shot up and began to bark ferociously, his gaze fixed on the metal speaker like it was hissing venom. Osler narrowed his eyes and adjusted the frequency dial. The sound was fluctuating, looping in ways he couldn't map, repeating like a phrase being spoken in a tongue no one had ever heard. "Wally," he muttered, reaching for the rotary phone on the desk. It rang 4 times before his friend picked up. "You hearing this?" "Yeah," came the crackling reply. "It started 10 minutes ago. I thought it was interference from the base in Los Alamos. But this isn't natural. This thing has structure." "Where's it coming from?" Osler asked. "I triangulated it." Roswell Osler didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, his flashlight, and his keys. Rex followed without needing to be called. The truck engine sputtered, then caught, and they tore into the desert night toward Roswell. The signal grew stronger as they approached the source, an open patch of field just east of town. Nothing around but scrub brush, barbed wire, and miles of emptiness. The receiver in the truck now screamed with layered tones, as if the signal itself were getting closer. Rex leapt against the truck window, snarling. The animal had never behaved like this. Osler pulled over. The signal cut out. He stepped outside. Windless. Too still. He scanned the field ahead. A shallow depression broke the landscape, half hidden in shadow. Then Rex barked once and bounded from the truck. "Rex!" Osler called, chasing after him. The ditch wasn't natural. It curved in a nearly perfect arc, maybe 10 feet deep. At its center, something metallic, embedded in the earth like a bullet frozen in time. It shimmered faintly even in darkness, smooth and seamless, like no aircraft Osler had ever seen. He took a slow step forward, heart pounding. Then, light. A blinding white blaze poured over him, like the sun had fallen from orbit. The entire landscape was bathed in it. Osler shielded his eyes and looked up. Above him hovered a shape he couldn't comprehend. Not saucer-like, not like any machine he'd imagined, just radiant and vast, a presence more than a craft. The signal roared back to life in his ears, not from the truck, not from the sky, but from inside his own head. Rex growled once, low and fearful, then fell silent, and then everything went black. The next morning, the field was empty. No Rex, no truck, no Osler, only a strange circular scorch in the earth and silence across the radio bands. He was never seen again. But the signal remained, trapped, archived, misunderstood, until the ice began to melt in Antarctica over half a century later. The year was 2003, and Antarctica was as merciless as ever. From above, the Axon research facility looked like a cluster of domes buried under white ruin, wind-scoured and half-frozen. Inside, beneath layers of steel and ice, humanity had begun to listen again. It started with a signal, faint, echoing, familiar. The technicians at Axon were monitoring routine geothermal data when the frequencies broke through, threaded between static bursts like something clawing through the cold. At first, no one paid it much attention, but the longer it played, the clearer it became. This wasn't noise. This was intelligent. A satellite sweep of the area revealed something impossible, an object embedded deep beneath the Antarctic ice shelf, untouched by time or nature. The data was relayed to the United States. Within days, the government quietly greenlit a classified investigation. That's when Julian Rome got the call. Half-suspected genius, half-scandalous outcast, Julian had once led cutting-edge cryptological work for SETI, decoding potential extraterrestrial communications until he crashed out of Stanford under a fog of academic scandal and womanizing. Now he taught linguistics at Berkeley, living off adrenaline, memory, and the attention of his students. He was grading papers when he got an unexpected email, a flirtatious message from one of his students. Before he could reply, the phone rang. "Julian," came the gravelly voice of John Bachman, a senior professor with ties to government labs. "We need to talk. Now." Julian assumed it was about the student. It wasn't. Bachman explained that a scientist named Alexei Gak, a former prodigy from Stanford's genetics program, had contacted him about a developing situation in Antarctica. Something had been uncovered, something broadcasting. He handed Julian a disk with the signal on it and asked for his help. Julian went home and loaded it into his equipment. What he found unsettled him. The signal wasn't random. It had intervals, rhythm, and possibly intention. It was not a glitch. It was designed. It might be a beacon, he told Bachman, or worse, a warning. Bachman was hesitant. Julian's past at SETI made him controversial. SETI had lost credibility in the scientific community, and Julian with it. But he was the only one who could crack something like this. Within days, Julian was on a flight to the South Pole. The descent was brutal. Winds shook the aircraft like it was made of paper. Visibility was zero. But when they finally touched down, a line of researchers was waiting for him in the snow. He was met by Nyla Lawson, a warm, no-nonsense grad student in a parka too big for her. She greeted him like they were old friends. Inside the facility, Julian was introduced to the team. There was Dr. Michael Straw, head of operations, dismissive, arrogant, and deeply skeptical of Julian's reputation. Kate Breer, the medic and former flame Julian had nearly lost his career over. Alexei Gak, the enthusiastic geneticist with a mind that never stopped spinning. And a rotating cast of technicians, Grisham, Shelley, Abel, and Di Petro. The object was buried in ice but had become partially exposed after a series of controlled melts. As Julian stood before it, massive, half encased in translucent blue, he felt something inside him tighten. "What do you think it is?" he asked Alexei. "Some kind of shale slack, geological debris trapped in a glacier." Julian stared harder. "That's no rock." "Maybe it's an artifact," Alexei said, "or an escape pod, or a weapon. I haven't told NASA yet. They'd freak out." Julian said nothing. He didn't need NASA's opinion to know. This thing wasn't made on Earth. When Alexei left, Julian reached out. The ice was smooth. The moment his fingers touched it, a jolt hit him like a memory detonating in reverse. Visions, faces, moments, regrets, and unspoken fears flashing across his mind. He stumbled back. "That's new," he muttered. Kate found him minutes later, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You're here to work. Don't flirt with the staff," she warned. Julian raised his hands. Wasn't planning to. Later that night, he couldn't sleep. Nightmares, visions of melting flesh and screaming signals kept him pinned to his sheets. When he finally woke, Nyla was at the door, asking if he wanted breakfast. She took him to the facility's greenhouse, a humid bioluminescent oasis filled with genetically engineered crops designed for off-world growth. She stripped into a bathing suit, explaining that pollen stuck to clothes. Julian watched her tend the plants, silent. Kate caught him looking. "Some things never change," she muttered. Later, Julian joined the rest of the crew for dinner. Straw made sarcastic remarks about Julian's job, listening for messages from E.T. Shelley asked if Julian actually believed in aliens. "Do you believe in God?" Julian replied. "Yes," she said. "Ever heard from him?" Silence. Everyone stared. Julian returned to the signal. Hours passed as he tried to break its structure. Grisham mentioned it could be a beacon. Julian nodded. Maybe it was a call, or maybe it was a lock. Then came the break. Abel, the maintenance officer, burst into the lab. "The ice cracked. The object fell. We've got a breach." The team rushed to the excavation chamber. The ice block had shattered. Steam hissed around the metal hull, now exposed, dark, domed, and humming faintly. Kate reached out to touch it, an invisible force through her back. Julian stared, realizing the message he was decoding wasn't just abstract. It was real time. He worked through the night, driven by Nyla's mention of a logic puzzle game she once loved, Mind Maze, where each key unlocked a letter. Julian reapplied the code with a new algorithm. The message resolved. "Do not open." He ran. Nyla followed. But it was already too late. A crew member had breached the hull. The chamber exploded in heat and light. One man vaporized before their eyes. Another staggered, skin bubbling, until he collapsed in a pool of melting flesh. Nyla clutched her stomach. "I don't feel so good," she whispered. She collapsed and began to melt. Panic erupted. Julian stared at the empty shell of the opened ship and realized, with a knot in his gut, that what had landed here had never meant to be found. The signal wasn't an invitation. It was a warning, and humanity had ignored it. Smoke still lingered in the excavation chamber, the scent of scorched metal and vaporized flesh clinging to every breath. A dull, electric hum pulsed through the ruins of the research bay, where the object, the escape pod, now lay open like a cracked egg. Inside, where the core should have been, there was only black ichor and the shriveled husk of a being no longer alive. But it had brought something with it, something invisible, something alive. Nyla had melted, so had 3 others, and the rest might be next. Julian stood in the corner of the medbay, his hands shaking as he watched Kate wrap her own shoulder wound, jaw clenched against the pain. She hadn't screamed when she was shot. She didn't scream now. Her blood soaked through the gauze slowly, almost politely. That kind of control was terrifying. They'd all changed. In the course of 24 hours, the team had gone from scientists to survivors. The facility, once humming with research, politics, flirtation, and tension, was now quiet, cracked, and haunted. The worst wasn't the death, it was the waiting. "We have to leave," Straw repeated, pacing. His eyes were too wide, too fast. "We're not sick. None of us have melted, so we're fine." "No," Julian said flatly. "We're carriers, or could be. We leave here and we take it with us." "You don't know that." "I know what I saw." Shelley was already running blood tests, but even she admitted the data was inconclusive. The pathogen might not show up in standard panels. It could be dormant, mutated, waiting. Julian couldn't stop picturing Nyla's face as she collapsed, the slow horror, the eyes pleading. And now there was another problem. The Russians were coming, not to rescue, but to cleanse. A tactical strike had been authorized. Bakemen had broken protocol to warn Julian. They had 3 hours before the facility would be wiped off the map in a mushroom cloud of denial. Straw didn't care. "I'm leaving," he said, "with or without you." "You walk out that door," Julian said. "You become patient zero." The silence that followed was volcanic. When the crew voted to stay quarantined, Straw's fury turned violent. He and one loyal tech jumped Grisham in the hall, stabbing him and stealing the gun. Alexei caught a bullet to the shoulder, trying to intervene. Kate was hit next. Julian tackled Strasser. They struggled in the greenhouse as corn stalks whipped around them, but Straw broke free. With his partner, he slipped into the old irrigation tunnels, hoping to outrun both Conscience and Fire. Julian chased them. By the time he reached the lower corridors, he could already see the death blooming behind them. The crops, genetically perfect, thriving just hours ago, were wilting in the pair's wake. Leaves blackened, roots shriveled. The pathogen was spreading. One of Straw's allies saw it too. "We're sick," he muttered, stopping. "We're going to kill everyone." Straw tried to drag him forward. The man resisted. Julian caught up just in time to see the man tackle Straw, gun going off in the struggle. Blood sprayed the tunnel walls. The man went down. Straw ran. Julian followed him through narrow access shafts until they reached the surface. And that's when he saw it. Hanging just above the ice, impossibly quiet and radiating light, was a second ship. Larger, more elegant, watching. "Don't move," Julian warned. But Straw spun in panic. The light intensified. In a flash of colorless brilliance, Straw disintegrated. His atoms pulled apart like sand through a sieve. Julian fell to his knees. The wind howled. The ship descended. A ramp opened. No sound, no voices, just a presence, ancient and terrible and beautiful. Julian rose and went back inside. Kate was still alive. Barely. Shelley and Alexei were stabilizing her. The others looked up as he returned. "They're here," Julian said, "not to destroy us, to save who's left." No one argued. The team climbed to the roof, battered and bleeding. The snow had stopped. The stars returned. Julian reached out to Kate. "Come with me." She hesitated. "I'm staying by your side," he said. "This time I mean it." She nodded. One by one, the survivors stepped into the light. The world below was already forgetting them. A cover story was in place. A nuclear accident, tragic and total. Names recited by solemn newscasters, faces blurred in memory, truth buried in fallout. But above Earth, rising into the black, a ship carried 4 survivors through the stratosphere and beyond. Julian looked back once through a portal of shimmering glass and saw the fire blooming below as the missile struck. The facility vanished, every scrap of evidence incinerated, and with it, humanity's first and almost last contact with a greater universe. He turned away from the Earth, toward whatever was next. The light grew brighter, and the signal, once a warning, became something else. Hope.